What's up, everyone? Elliot here from Entre Educator with another video to help educators make the leap, next step, or that transition into entrepreneurship. I'm super excited because today we have a really special guest. His name is Raul Gutierrez, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Raul Gutierrez. I'm founder and CEO of TinyBop. And we also run and manage FunBrain, which we acquired a couple of years ago in an acquisition.
Awesome. So today we're going to be primarily talking about FunBrain. It's a really cool website that I personally use for my own tutoring online. It helps the kids because there's so much there. And so I wanted to get into this with Raw a little bit because in the past, as you guys know, I've been mostly interviewing other people who have started tutoring companies or doing really well on OutSchool, but no one yet who actually runs and manages an educational platform themselves. So I'm super excited. And Raw, I'm wondering if you can kind of walk us through how you acquired the site.
TinyBop is a company that's been around since 2012. We make apps for kids that are STEM apps primarily, and we sell all over the world, 150 countries, millions of kids. And one of our investors uh, had basically owned FunBrain, and FunBrain was one of these sites that back in 1998 there were some educators behind it, and it started growing, became really gigantic in the sort of early 2000s. Um, One of the artists who worked at FunBrain was a guy named Jeff Kinney, who started something called Diary of a Wimpy Kid as a web comic on FunBrain. And so Diary of a Wimpy Kid kind of took off and became its own thing. And the
Right.
web comic turned into a book and a movie and all this other stuff. And obviously he moved on from FunBrain, but as sort of a gift to FunBrain, the original web series is actually the galley of his original book. Actually, the first couple of books is on there, and we've had it on the site forever. Um, and the site basically was bought and sold several times. And when we took it, it had been neglected for a while. It had been uh, I think Pearson owned it at one point. It was a gigantic company, and they didn't really know what to do with it. And when we took it over a year and a half ago, had a lot of technical debt, had a lot of things that kind of weren't working. A lot of the site was built in Flash, which is disappearing, and has recently like pretty much disappeared, um, and just hadn't been updated in years. And that's both good and bad. It's good because teachers can rely on it. Things basically were kind of where they were supposed to be, but things were starting to break. And so when we took it over, we basically started to fix it, which is a harder task than you would imagine, because again, stuff stretching back 20 years and none of the source code was available and so on. But rewrote a bunch of things. And then we also, TinyBob sort of our skill set is building kind of really uh, a slightly different kind of content. And so the question was, how do we build really beautiful content? Sorry for all the sirens. We are in New York. Um, how do we build content that is right for FunBrain, which is really a very humor-based site and a skilled-based site, versus TinyBop, which is more open play. And and we've planned a lot of that stuff out. And we've just started doing it. There was a game that had been on the site forever, and it was built in Flash and it disappeared, called Don't Gross Out the World, about like eating etiquette around the world. Um, and the original game, again, it was linked all over the place and people had used it forever. But like for today's sensibilities, a lot of some of the imagery was probably not culturally sensitive in the way that you know uh, we are today. Um, and so we essentially rewrote that app, from scratch, and the feedback's been really good. We have teachers that have found it again and right away started using it. Books have always been a big part of the site. We're just about to, I think tomorrow or next week, there's a classic story called My Father's Dragon, which is, kind of a first chapter book for a lot of kids. Um, that book is in the public domain. There are a lot of like really crappy copies of it around. And so we, found some first editions, scanned everything, really made like a beautiful digital copy, very, sort of high quality that we think like lots of kids will love to read. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing.
Nice. Yeah. And again, for anyone who's interested, go check out funbrain.com because you'll notice how the breadth of resources that are on there for educators and students. It's awesome. Raul, I'm wondering, can you tell the people who are listening a little bit about your background? How did you get into the educational technology space?
Again, sort of a long, winding path, but I went to college as an electrical engineer, but I graduated with an art history degree, and so I've always kind of been in between, kind of something involving design and tech. Uh, After that, I went to Hollywood and I worked with a very infamous producer, getting canceled right now, and worked on a bunch of movies. Clueless was the first movie I worked on in the
Oh,
industry.
wow.
Um, but like tech always kind of pulled me in. I worked at a bunch of startups, and at some point I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to like start my own company. I'd always worked for other people, but like I think I'm an entrepreneur at heart, and I basically gave myself a year. I put myself in a co-working space. I gave myself a year to come up with an idea, and I was working on a whole bunch of other things. And during that year, my then he's now 16, but back then he was a kindergartner. He came to me, and we're pretty Luddite parents. We like don't have, we don't have a TV in the house. And he came to me and he said the only thing he wanted for his birthday was an iPad or an iPhone. And we were horrified. And
Right.
we were like, why is this so important to him? And so I just started talking to him. And he said, well, it's an everything machine. It can tell a story and be my friend and, do all these things. And, um, and I started sort of investigating what he was doing on the phone, when you go over to friends' houses and stuff. And I found that my problem wasn't so much with the phone. It was actually with the content that was on there. Because a lot of the content was basically marketing for something else.
Hmm.
Like some kids Disney something that they were, trying to sell them something. Um, or it was content that was very poorly put together. There are a lot of sort of just multiple choice type things that had were using clip art. They just looked ugly, and then literally the goal and many of them was just to like win gold coins, which is kind of like almost like a gambling mechanism.
Right.
And I was like, well, how can we make something uh, different? Like, as a parent, the thing that I love the most and where I found that my kids were learning the most was when they were really kind of engaged in a problem.
Mm.
And like my favorite toy for kids are blocks. And a lot of times you'll give a set of kids blocks and they'll say, well, what do we do? And then you just say, well, build a city or build a zoo. And the minute they have that little bit of context, they'll build something. And so uh, that really was kind of the start of Tiny Bob. It really got me very interested in how kids learn and why certain stuff sticks and certain things don't. Um, I, didn't really uh, uh, I wasn't really immersed in sort of educational theory until after our first app came out. And then, there were people at MIT that like work in the lifelong kindergarten project there. And they were saying, well, did you study Piaget and, and Montessori?
Yep.
And and we actually hadn't looked at any of that stuff. It was just me as a parent, sort of looking at how kids play and trying to put that in there. But then we sort of immersed ourselves in all that and kind of adjusted. And really, that's been kind of the backbone of our philosophy of how we started building things, at least with Tiny Bot. And we're now starting to try to infuse some of that into Funbrain as well.
Awesome. Let's talk about the monetary aspect of FunBrain. Can you tell us, how the site generates an income?
Sure. So Funbrain is an ad-supported site, and it's something that I personally don't love ad-supported sites. Like I don't like serving ads to kids. Um, that said, transitioning to a paid site uh, for uh, for a website like Funbrain that has such broad appeal um, is very tough. And so it's something we've been thinking about. We've been thinking about sort of having a free ad supported option and a paid option where you can like get rid of the ads for a small fee.
Right.
It's just taken a while to implement. Um, with ad supported sites, in order for them to break even, you have to serve a lot of ads. And
Yeah, can
so,
you talk a
uh,
little bit more about that? I mean, I for the educators who are thinking like maybe I could make my own educational site on whatever topic they're most interested in, what kind of, I think we would all like to really appreciate to know what kind of traffic does it require to generate that maybe 1K a month or 5K a month, kind of even 10K a month?
yeah, so with with Funbrain, in order to, the way I sort of will put it is, in order to support one engineer on that site, we have to generate somewhere between 10 and 20 million pages. Um, and that's one engineer salary, one New York engineer salary.
Right.
And and that's not even talking about, there's also sort of diminishing returns too, because hosting and so on gets very expensive at that scale. Funbrain serves millions and millions of pages. I think last 6 months it's like 180 million, 200 million pages.
Wow.
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's a big number.
Sure.
Um, and in order to do that, there's just sort of a level of of traffic and traction and mind share that you have to have. So like unless you're sort of a super viral sensation, for most people that are starting, I think probably a better strategy is to to start small, uh, to build a loyal following, build a brand, um, and then figure out ways to charge, for content through subscription or through, on something like OutSchool, you can reach a large audience and just be one person. Um, the key always is to figure out how to scale,
Mhm.
and and ideally you can do that. You can't scale yourself if you're a single educator. So you're either doing that through a site where you're always creating, the content that you're creating can be reused.
Mhm.
So if you're teaching a class, if you can do something asynchronously where those get archived somewhere. If you're creating a game, it's something that kids can do over and over again. Or another way to do it is to, if the kids are creating content, if you're creating something that they're then riffing off of and sharing, and there's a network effect. But I would say if I were starting from scratch, that's how I would do it. I think even in the App Store right now, when on the TinyBop side of things, when we started, um, there were not that many companies like involved in the App Store for education for kids. The vast majority of them that were there when we started are now gone.
Hmm.
And part of the reason is that, like, from the very first day, we really concentrated on brand. We didn't want people searching uh, for a specific, our like most famous app, probably Bot. So we didn't want people searching for that app. We wanted them searching for TinyBot. So
Right.
we never talked about specific apps. We talked about TinyBot. If you're an educator, right down the street, there's a guy, Carmelo the Science Fellow. He's got a great name. He's got, he started out as a little kind of after school program, but now he's online and he's got booklets and he's got a personality and a name and he brands himself really well. Um, those are the kinds of things that, as an individual, if you're not creating a company, if basically you're selling yourself, that I think is a strategy that works pretty well.
I was wondering if you have any insight, recommendations from your experience. What do you do to create your game content, the really technical type of content?
Well, it's not cheap. It's very expensive. It takes years to make your money back. On TinyBop, we ended up raising money. So we've raised millions of dollars, and when after we started, we went from 0 to like 27 people relatively quickly. Um, and a single TinyBot game was 6 months of work from like a whole team of people. They're
Hmm.
very expensive. Each of those games, has now been downloaded millions and millions of times around the world. But even so, they still take years to make their money back. We're just now starting to make our money back from things that we put out in 2015, 2016.
Right.
Um, so it's a long game, and education is a long game. I think you know uh, for an individual, like creating a small site, um, there are kind of low cost. The tools are much better now than they used to be.
Hmm.
So there are tools like Unity, that allow someone to build a game, in a couple of weeks that used to take years to do. But you're still competing against companies like TinyBop or companies like, whatever, that are spending, $500,000 on a game. And so, uh, we work with educators and designers and sound people and animators, and it's almost like a little movie,
Hmm.
in terms of the complexity of what we're doing. So I do think that on the other end of things, they're really simple games. FunBrain is really simple games. It's one-digit math, two-digit.
Hmm.
It's something that it's almost hard for us to do those really simple games because they are so simple.
Right.
Some of the most popular things on FunBrain are like mouse skills for kindergartners, where like it's like a digging worm app where they're like literally just you know touching the worms,
Right.
um, and so for an ambitious company, it's often very hard to think like that. But if you're an educator, you're in the classroom and you see that, kids are having problems with long vowel sounds, or, short vowel sounds, or two-digit fractions. Um, there are kind of worksheet type problems that you can, one person programming can do that easily. So I think you always want to focus on the stuff that you're uh, that you're able to do well. If you're one person, you're trying to hire somebody to make something, don't try to make the super crazy elaborate game.
Right.
Find the small containable piece that is the really important thing that kids need to know, and then figure out a fun way into it. Like, what's the thing that gets your kids excited when you talk about it in class?
Mm.
And it can just be an image in the background. It can be a rainbow or a unicorn, and just really simple. What's what's really interesting with children's games is, it can be a multi-million-dollar Pixar movie, or it can be something created by one guy,
Okay.
or gal. Um, and kids often will have the same emotional reaction to it, because their imaginations fill in all the gaps.
True. Right.
So, they can have the same sort of emotional reaction to a very, very simple game with stick figures, as they do to a big movie. So you don't have to have the giant production, but you do have to be tackling the right problem.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about to the type of maintenance or the type of work that goes into FunBrain right now.
Well, I mean, I tell you something that happened today. I mean, it's an ad-supported site, and suddenly, like, the company that we work with to serve ads, there was, had some issue, and every game that people were clicking on, they would get a black screen. And so when you're at the scale that we are, that's a lot of like upset kids and teachers. And so it's something that is, we have to work with partners on advertising. So it's actually not in our court. So it's me, on the phone yelling at somebody saying we have to do this thing. And it turns out that it's like kind of this tricky technical thing that got introduced. And it'll probably take a few days to sort out. Um, but it's hard and expensive to sort out, because like I have to get a whole bunch of people involved to figure out, like, exactly what's happening.
Right. And my next question was going to be about the future goal. So we sort of talked about how it started and what you're doing now, and I would love to know your idea of pushing this forward.
Really, what I'd love to do is build new content, for a Fun Brain that has some of the same kind of humor um, and whimsy that the original site had. So we have a whole slate of new games planned, um, that are in the spirit of the original. They're again sort of focusing on these small problems: long vowel sounds, short vowel sounds,
Right.
idioms, uh, where we've had a lot of requests from English as a second language teachers.
Mm.
So we'd like to start to have Spanish language, Chinese language, and a few others on the site as well, and have the apps have different versions of that. That's part of TinyBop's secret sauce. TinyBop apps are in like 40 languages.
Mm.
Um, if you go to the site, you'll see there is some TinyBop content on there. So
Oh,
we
really?
have
Okay.
we have a new schools product for TinyBop Schools, that is a web-based subscription service, STEM apps, um, and it's a way to kind of introduce teachers to that content.
I really appreciate you taking the time today, Raul. And for a lot of the people in the Entre Educator group are basically teachers
Mhm.
who also have that entrepreneurial spirit. At the moment, they probably have a side hustle. They're probably working on their first website, and they're probably trying to either pick the problem that they're trying to solve or figure out how to solve the problem that they want to. And for all of the people in the group, can you give them any advice, any insight on from your experience, how to go forward?
Um, well, it's always harder to do things. Okay. It's really great if you can do it yourself without raising money, but there are certain ideas that require money from other people. Um, Raising money is really hard, but uh, we live kind of in the golden age of entrepreneurship that way, because there's a lot of resources on the web, and there are a lot of different ways to go about it. And if you have an idea that's really great and it can scale and you can prove it even at a small scale, there's probably money out there to fund your idea. Like, if you have been able to uh, get, let's say, 1,000 paying customers, and you started from zero and you have 1,000 paying customers paying you X number of dollars, and you can prove that that's a scalable business. There's probably some entrepreneur out there that, or some investor out there that's willing to take a chance on you.
Right.
And really kind of after at a certain scale, raising money is really a big part of the job. And it's something that that used to be very hard to do, but again, now there's a lot of resources out there. Even just on Twitter, there are VCs that are posting, looking for things. There are conferences, especially in Zoom world, pretty easy. You can pitch on Zoom, and people tell you, poke holes in your idea. Um, but my main sort of piece of advice is make sure your idea is the right one, and the right one for the audience. Once you kind of put something out there and start to build audience, make sure to measure everything. Um, Measure the number of people that you come to the site, the number of people you convert, the number, if you're a subscription site, when they start, when they leave the subscription, because those are the numbers that are really going to matter when you are trying to scale.
Hmm.
Um, it's I would say it's always hard to do any business, but it's relatively easy to create like sort of a mom and pop business. It's going to pay your bills and like give you maybe more options and opportunities than you had before. It's really hard to take that kind of business and to scale it to a point where you have, employees, you're making payroll every month, and you always need X number of new employees to get to the next level.
Right.
Um, those it's really hard, and there's not sort of a single path. But again, we live in the golden age of resources. There's more people out there talking about entrepreneurship than ever before. Um,
Absolutely.
and so even just groups like this, people exchanging ideas, being open and honest about like where they run into problems, it can be really helpful because if you read carefully, you can avoid some of those things.
Good point. Absolutely. Raul, again, thank you so much for your time. For anyone who wants to check out your companies, or if you're on social, do you want to share where we could find you?
Sure. Funbrain.com. TinyBop, if you go to the Apple App Store and just search for TinyBop, will come up. Also, tinybop.com. We have great resources for educators on TinyBop. There's something called TinyBop Loves. It's tinybop.com/loves. That's our favorite books and apps and websites. We're always looking for new things. There's a great resource for parents or teachers. TinyBop Schools, schools.tinybop.com. And on Twitter, it's at TinyBop. Funbrain doesn't really have a Twitter presence, but we're trying to start one. So that's just at Funbrain. We're on Instagram, and I'm the Mexican. I'm at the Mexican.
Awesome.
Everywhere.
Cool. Again, I really appreciate your time, Raul, and thank you so much.
Sure thing.
All right.
Good luck.